In 1791, the U.S. Constitution defined people as property. Indian Removal Act forced indigenous communities to leave their homelands, displacing 100,000 Native American children and adults as they marched thousands of miles west into unknown territory. 15,000 did not survive the journey, but over 25 million acres of land was made available for white settlers. In 1854, non-whites were barred from testifying in court. In 1857, freed slaves paid taxes but had no rights to citizenship. In 1862, slaves were freed in D.C., but former slave owners were reimbursed for slaves given up. The whites were paid over $1 million in reparations for lost property. Following the Civil War of 1862, the Reconstruction era attempted to transform the southern United States in an effort to promote African American freedom. However, the federal government restored white supremacist control to the South and adopted a laissez-faire policy, which resulted in African American disenfranchisement, social, economical, educational, and employment discrimination. They were deprived of their civil human rights and reduced to second-class citizenship. The ignorance bred lawless mass violence, murder, and lynching.
We came to Levittown and we found the model house, and we walked in and we looked around, and of course, in the eyes of a young man who was raised in the ghetto, so to speak, it was an interesting experience, interesting lifestyle, seeing all the new modern conveniences, very fascinating.
Eugene Burnett came home with almost 1 million other black GIs. They had fought for the country in segregated ranks. They returned hoping for equality and the American dream. For many, that dream was a new home for little money down and some of the easiest credit terms in history.
I went up to the salesman. We're interested in your home, we're interested in buying one, and what is the procedure? Is there an application to be filled out? So forth. So he looked at me, looked around, and he said to me, he says, listen, it's not me, but the owners of this development have not as yet decided to sell these homes to Negroes.
Starting in the 1930s, government officials institutionalized the national appraisal system, where race was as much a factor in real estate assessment as the condition of the property.
Are you personally aware of prejudice in Birmingham? Well, of course, I guess there's a certain amount of prejudice, but I'm not aware of there being much prejudice, nothing like the people of the North seem to think. Among my friends, we don't seem to have any particular prejudice.
The American Civil Rights Movement was a mass protest movement against racial segregation and discrimination in the southern United States that came to national prominence during the mid-1950s. This movement had its roots in centuries-long efforts of African slaves and their descendants to resist racial oppression and abolish the institution of slavery. Although American slaves were emancipated as a result of the Civil War and were then granted basic civil rights through the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, struggles to secure federal protection of these rights continued during the next century. Through nonviolent protests, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s broke the pattern of public facilities being segregated by race in the South and achieved the most important breakthrough in equal rights legislation for African Americans since the Reconstruction period of the late 1800s. Although the passage in 1964 and 1965 of major civil rights legislation was victorious for the movement, by then, militant black activists had begun to see their struggle as a freedom or liberation movement, not just seeking civil rights reforms, but instead confronting the enduring economic, political, and cultural consequences of past racial oppression. In this project so far, we have witnessed the progress of institutional and individual racism. My research question was, which came first, individual racism or institutional racism? And I asked such an unanswerable question because it forces us to realize the inextricable ties between the two. We've seen history through slavery and now to the civil rights movement. And now I wonder where we stand today in regards to individual and institutional racism. I started my project with an extensive history lesson because I wanted to approach the topic beginning with the roots of racism in America. Because I know that after time, the intensity and the weight of slavery becomes diluted and we become calloused to the struggle of equality in America.
Just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the Jesus harmony.
Because the book consistently asks what the bright side within the dark side of communication is, I asked the same. My overall answer is there is not a bright side of racism, but there are bright concepts that we can find within. I would say that a bright side of racism is a source of social identity for many people that are oppressed. Within the group process of those who fight for equality together, we better get a sense of who we are and what we're worth being in that group.
Don't need no ticket. You just thank the Lord.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Tonight is a particular honor for me because, let's face it, my presence on this stage is pretty unlikely. My father was a foreign student, born and raised in a small village in Kenya. My parents shared not only an improbable love, they shared an abiding faith in the possibilities of this nation. I stand here knowing that my story is part of the larger American story, that I owe a debt to all of those who came before me, and that in no other country on earth is my story even possible. Alongside our famous individualism, there's another ingredient in the American saga. A belief that we're all connected as one people. If there is a child on the south side of Chicago who can't read, that matters to me even if it's not my child. If there's a senior citizen somewhere who can't pay for their prescription drugs and having to choose between medicine and the rent, that makes my life poorer even if it's not my grandparent. It is that fundamental belief, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, that makes this country work. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, even as we speak, there are those who are preparing to divide us. The spin masters, the negative ad peddlers, who embrace the politics of anything goes. Well, I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states, but I've got news for them too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around in our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states, and yes, we've got some gay friends in the red states. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America. In the end, that's what this election is about. Do we participate in a politics of cynicism, or do we participate in a politics of hope? It's the hope of slaves sitting around a fire singing freedom songs. The hope of immigrants setting out for distant shores. The hope of a young naval lieutenant bravely patrolling the Mekong Delta. The hope of a mill worker's son who dares to defy the odds. The hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too. Hope in the face of difficulty. Hope in the face of uncertainty. The audacity of hope. I believe this country will reclaim its promise, and out of this long political darkness, a brighter day will come. Thank you very much, everybody. God bless you.
In 1968, April 4th, I was with Martin Luther King in Memphis. We'd had a staff meeting previously in Atlanta, planning for the Poor People's Campaign.
Let me stand.
And they kept calling on him in Memphis, if he could just come to Memphis just for one day. So we regrouped the staff and we all went to Memphis.
I am weak. I am one. Through the storm.
So we started talking that night, the 3rd of April, on the general campaign and what we were supposed to do. Next morning, I got this thing laid out, so we were talking after the staff meeting about the Poor People's Campaign and what I was going to do in Washington, D.C. Out of the blue, Martin Luther King said to me, we were there alone in the room, he says, "Now, Bernard, the next campaign we're going to have is to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence."
Take my hand.
Those last words.
Precious Lord.
When there are protests, it forces the viewers to pick a side.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure.
How we explain that when someone is cruel or acts like a bully, you don't stoop to their level. No, our motto is, when they go low, we go high. That is the story of this country, the story that has brought me to this stage tonight, the story of generations of people who felt the lash of bondage, the shame of servitude, the sting of segregation, but who kept on striving and hoping and doing what needed to be done so that today I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves. And I watch my daughters, two beautiful, intelligent black young women, playing with their dogs on the White House lawn.
Memo, Michelle Obama referenced slaves building the White House and referring to the evolution of America. Slaves that worked there were well fed and had decent lodgings provided by the government.
Bill O'Reilly embodies white fragility when, in his desperation to reestablish racial equilibrium, he says that slaves were well fed and had decent accommodations.
Oh, glory, 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 oh, glory, glory.
Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon formed against, yes, glory.
Well, thanks to Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, the new Black Panthers, and all these thugs in the Black Lives Matter movement, unfortunately, Dr. King, your children are still judged based on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. Why? Because that's what they want.
This popular YouTube blogger is a perfect example of white narcissism in his suggestion that racism exists because African Americans prefer it to.
That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walked through Ferguson with our hands up.
I have said it's a hate group built upon an opinion by their leadership of white supremacy, keeping blacks down. How do you define Black Lives Matter?
Well, first of all, I think the term is very divisive. The first time I heard it, I said, you have to be kidding. It can't be used that. They just can't. I think it's a very, very, very divisive term. There's no question.
Now the war is not over, victory isn't won, but we'll fight on to the finish, and then when it's all done, we'll cry glory, oh glory, oh.
Selma is now for every man, woman, and child. Even Jesus got his crown in front of a crowd. They march with the torch, we gon' run with it now. Never look back, we done gone hundreds of miles. From dark roads, heroes, to become a hero. Facing the League of Justice, his power was the people. Enemy is lethal.